Formulaic episodes, overly long seasons, mediocre CGI, mostly uninteresting storylines that pretty much go into poor directions, and superheroes most people know and love. That's right, it's time to finally talk about the Arrowverse on my channel. Originally, I was gonna rewatch every single Arrowverse show and then make separate videos on them, but you know what? Screw all of that. That's too many hours. I'd probably go crazy doing that. So let's rank all of the shows in one overly long video. This will probably shock a lot of people considering Supergirl exists, but in last place, we have Black Lightning. Black Lightning is an unfortunate case of me wishing this show was better, and it's simply not living up to anything I wish it would have become. I wanted this show to become at least a decent, high-quality Arrowverse show. I know, feel free to laugh at me in the comments for having one simple hope. However, Black Lightning has arguably one of the weakest opening seasons compared to the rest of the Arrowverse lineup. The two things I did like about the first season of Black Lightning is that the opening episode captures the viewer's attention since it is a very mature topic, and I genuinely love the idea of finally having a superhero show where the main character is already being a superhero. No origin story, no rough beginnings, and no major learning curve. That is something I wanted from an Arrowverse show for once, considering every show has exactly those things. However, everything else outside of those likable ideas or creative decisions is pretty much lackluster and or at least didn't capture my attention. If I can suffer through seasons 3 through 5 of The Flash, I'm pretty sure the bar for capturing my attention is fairly low. Outside of that, one of the main reasons I personally never got into Black Lightning is because the first season wasn't even that memorable. Typically, the Arrowverse shows all have super strong openings and have really good first and or second seasons followed by a massive downfall, but it was the exact opposite for me with Black Lightning. After binge watching the first season, I had almost no interest in ever going back to see what happens in season 2 or seeing what happened at the end of Black Lightning's story now that it's over. It's unfortunate, but this is another show in the Arrowverse that should have been really good, just like Supergirl. I originally had plans to put this in last place, but because of how good this character is around other members of the Arrowverse during crossovers, Supergirl's not the absolute worst show in the Arrowverse, but it's pretty damn bad. I've tried, alright? I've watched the first season despite it not being canon, considering it wasn't a part of the CW originally, and I've even watched most of the second season before I had to give up. I wanted to give Supergirl a chance and actually attempt to get into the show because I've had so many conversations where people have told me that the show at least gets better in its later seasons, but I couldn't do it. There's almost nothing redeeming about the show. There's just so many bad things about the show that it stacks against the odds of me getting into it. Poor writing, terrible CGI, boring characters, and a boring episode formula compared to the other Arrowverse shows. It's truly a shame because I've heavily enjoyed every single interaction Kara has ever had with any of the Arrowverse characters during any of their Arrowverse crossover events. Most notably, her chemistry with the Flash and Batwoman, when Ruby Rose was still casted as Batwoman, was absolutely phenomenal, and I pretty much had a smile on my face the entire time when they were together. So it's not even like I have anything against Melissa Benoist as Supergirl, but everything else in the Supergirl show actually lets her down heavily. This should have been a show that got the same level of love that Superman and Lois had gotten, or even enough love that's even slightly lower than the typical bar that most early seasons of the Arrowverse shows have left behind for Supergirl to match. It sucks because almost every other Arrowverse show I've managed to somewhat get into besides Black Lightning and Supergirl. Unfortunately, the Supergirl show is simply not good enough nor interesting enough for me to spend a ton of hours binge watching multiple seasons with over 20 episodes per season. I'll keep watching crossovers and enjoy the standalone moments that Kara gets away from her show because that's where she strives, but I'm good on the show. Not that this matters, but it doesn't seem like Supergirl becomes that great of a show towards the later seasons anyway. After seeing this Supergirl clip go viral on Twitter, I'm kind of glad I never spent a large amount of time getting into the show, because boy, this clip is rough to watch.
When the ones you love turn their back on you, that's pain. But you'll see when you suffer the way you made me suffer. You can't touch me without hurting yourself.
In 5th place, we have Batwoman. When Batwoman's first season was available to watch, I gave it an honest chance without any expectation. This is mostly because I do love the city of Gotham and anything having to typically do with the Batman mythology. Even though Ruby Rose has left the show due to various circumstances, I still feel it's fair to give my thoughts on the first season. Truthfully, I liked the first season and was almost shocked at how decent it was. But if we're being honest, it wasn't anything close to the first seasons of Arrow, Flash, or even The Legends of Tomorrow. It didn't capture me to the point where I was obsessed or needed to know what was happening next in each episode, but I enjoyed it for what it was. Batwoman's action scenes were actually better than I expected too, and I say this because I have absurdly low expectations for any new Arrowverse show. Can you blame me? It was the first time where I was watching an Arrowverse show and was actually reminded of the good old days when Arrow was an actually good, enjoyable show that was worth watching. Originally, I thought diving into the second season would have been a little harder for me, considering whatever plans they've had for this show had to likely change drastically. This led to me having super low expectations for their new protagonist and whatever their potential storyline was going to be. The new protagonist, Ryan Wilder, is actually more interesting than Kate Kane. Ryan has a shocking level of depth. For instance, this is shown in one of the very first scenes in her first episode. She touches lightly on her past and we find out that she's an ex-convict because someone planted drugs on her, and as a result, she's homeless and struggling to find a job. They also give us flashbacks of Ryan getting jumped as she suits up for the first time as Batwoman, which makes the viewer care about her, or at least want to get to know more about her. You also can't help but feel like her getting the suit was the right choice for that universe because of her past. Through the various bits and pieces of information that we've learned, you can't help but be like, you know what? You've earned the Batwoman suit, Ryan. In comparison to Kate Kane, who is more of an I'm gonna do things my way type of character, almost like Oliver Queen, but just more obnoxious and with less personality overall. I totally understand if someone were to watch Batwoman season 1 and be like, I simply don't like Kate at all, her character isn't for me. It's refreshing to finally have a new main character in the Arrowverse that's worth investing your time into again after years of mediocrity. And because of that, Batwoman is likely going to have my long-term interest. Honestly, I'd probably put this show much higher if it had more seasons to compare to the other Arrowverse shows. But with that not being the case, and this being the very beginning of Ryan's story as a superhero, I simply can't do that. Hell, I'd probably put this show above the next show on my list, but as I said, we haven't really spent enough time with Ryan Wilder to be able to propel our show forward on these rankings. Don't worry though, when this season's done airing, I'll likely end up doing a full season 2 review as a video to give my thoughts about the direction of Ryan Wilder, the story, and the state of the show as a whole heading into season 3. I can finally rant about this now. It's time we discussed Legends of Tomorrow, which is in 4th place. Originally, I had a soft spot for Legends of Tomorrow, and I'm talking like season 1 and season 2 of Legends of Tomorrow. I loved all of the Misfits when they were in their respective shows, such as Sarah Lance, White Canary, Ray Palmer, Adam in Arrow, Letter Snart, Captain Cold, Mick Rory, He-Wave in Flash, and the list goes on. However, it's time that someone said it. This show is not as good as it used to be, and it's just not fun to watch anymore. My frustration with Legends of Tomorrow is that these cast of characters are misfits, and because they're misfits, they bounce off of each other with stupid jokes. So there's constant comedic relief throughout this stupid episode simply doesn't work for me anymore. I feel like I've grown out of the show because those characters have yet to grow up by any means whatsoever. For instance, Sarah Lance is still the team leader that cracks jokes and isn't afraid to get things done. but also still has her flaws. Heatwave is still the obnoxious drunk who makes some funny one-liners here and there, but at the same time we need to give him a comedic side, so let's make him have this second identity where he's a writer with a pseudonym that has a target audience made up of predominantly women just for jokes. Ray Palmer is the witty yet super smart guy that's almost too smart for his own good, but nearly everyone respects him because he's clearly the most pure team member. Hell, even Rick respects him enough despite him calling Ray haircut throughout Ray's entire time on the show. The list goes on, but these characters never leave these tropes or fully grow into better versions of themselves, because if they did, the writers probably wouldn't be able to easily write corny jokes as the Legends of Tomorrow saved the timeline from a random issue at a random location during a random point in history, which is another problem I have with this show. Typically, I don't even hate CGI because almost every comic book show has CGI. That's life. But with this show, literally being centered around misfit characters, going to a location in history, interacting with old historical figures that most people know if they've ever taken a history class, messing things up temporarily, finally fixing the problem, going about their day, and then on top of all of that, terrible CGI because of the fact they need to go to historical places in the world, it's hard to like the show anymore because it has stayed in its overly done formula without actively getting better or fully getting worse. It's grown to fully feel stagnant to me as a viewer. It sucks because I've liked almost every single one of these characters before this show was even a thing, and now I sort of can't stand them after several seasons with them away from the various shows we've met them in. I want them to grow and have better personalities instead of sticking to their consistent, boring, or obnoxious tropes that they've had since the moment we've met them. Also, the ongoing jokes throughout Legends of Tomorrow, such as the Bebo nonsense, did almost nothing for me. And once again, I understand if all of this is an unpopular opinion, but I stand by it. With all that being said, this is why I no longer love Legends of Tomorrow, and that's why it's going to stay here in 4th place on my personal rankings of the Arrowverse shows. Ranking these last 3 shows was harder than I thought it would be, especially because of how I feel about all 3 of these shows. But in 3rd place, we have Arrow. Obviously, without Arrow, we wouldn't be in this position, and we wouldn't have an entire universe of DC live-action superhero shows. That isn't up for debate. And you know what else isn't up for debate? Deathstroke is still the best villain Arrow has ever had, and the first season of Arrow is still the strongest season it's ever had. The show, just like The Flash, had an absolutely phenomenal start to the point where it easily hooked viewers. I will never forget the moment where Slade Wilson walked right up into Oliver's house and shook his hand in front of his entire family just to have the power position in their rivalry and to mess with Oliver's head. That moment blew my mind, and I was beyond blown away at that moment. There's a lot to like about Arrow. For instance, the overall tone and formula of the show is pretty damn good early on. The chemistry between all the characters starts off fine, especially because the main cast of characters doesn't expand to a roster that's the size of like a NBA team basically till way later on in the show. Every action scene of Arrow, once again early on in the show, is fantastic, and it basically feels like a Batman show whenever the action scenes begin. Shout out to Stephen Amell, by the way, for doing as many of his own stunts as he was allowed to, because he was big on making sure that he did his own stunts for the show. However, there's a massive portion of Arrow that simply goes down the drain to the point where those seasons are so bad that the only things you can possibly remember from the middle seasons is Oliver and Felicity's ridiculously toxic relationship. There's also another thing I'll never forget, which is just hilariously bad even for a comic book show. There's a scene in one of the middle Arrow seasons where Felicity's in a wheelchair, and the solution to getting her to walk again is one of the side characters, Curtis, who becomes Mr. Terrific, building a chip that goes into Felicity's back or spine and ends up literally being the reason she could walk. Look, I fully acknowledge that this is a comic book show that we're talking about here, but this is easily one of the dumbest things I have witnessed in a comic book show, and I will never let Arrow live that down, especially because this happens 2 episodes after she gets paralyzed. When it comes to Arrow's middle seasons, people either love it because they love Oliver and Felicity's relationship, or don't love it because they hate the relationship with every fiber in their body. There's really no in between, but the worst part about the middle seasons is that almost nothing from those seasons are truly memorable. And that's mostly because of the fact that the middle section of Arrow becomes Arrow and Friends, more so than just Arrow. Oliver becomes less important as the show goes on, and the main focal point of the show begins to slowly go to the supporting cast of characters. I've seen every episode of Arrow. I've talked about every season with all of my friends, and I still can't tell you about almost any season besides the season with Prometheus because it's the first time Arrow had a good season in years, literally. That was the first time I found Arrow to be even remotely enjoyable again since its first and second season. Seeing the motives that Prometheus has against Oliver and seeing how Oliver has to fight through Prometheus' insanity was phenomenal. If I was able to tell someone, yo, just skip to that season after season 2, I absolutely would. But there's various factors such as a major cast of new characters, storylines, and other things that they'd be missing out on if they were to just go straight to that season. In case you're wondering, one of the only reasons I never really dropped Arrow or Legends of Tomorrow is because I already had a time sink into them. And when they used to drop on Netflix, it'd typically be during my college breaks when I was in college, so I needed something to invest my time into. As much as I love Oliver Queen, Star City, his interactions with Barry Allen, and most of the action scenes in this show, Arrow sucks throughout the entire middle section. It's also pretty rough when you think about the fact that the entire last season can basically be thrown out the door now that we found out that the Arrow spin-off, Green Arrow and the Canaries, has been cancelled. So literally everything they set up in the final season is basically out of the window. As much as I love and appreciate Arrow, since it truly is one of the major reasons I got into reading comics, it's hard for me to put it into first place, which isn't even necessarily a win for The Flash. This rightfully deserves second place, so without further ado, Superman and Lois is currently in second place for me. I know I'm not fully alone on this, but Man of Steel genuinely made me not want to care about Superman, watch any old Superman movies, or even read a Superman comic book run because of how much I disliked Man of Steel. Trust me, I know it was a dumb decision, but I was 16 when this happened, which was way before I ever fully dove into reading comics and heavily watching comic book media. So when Superman and Lois's first 5 episodes got released on HBO Max, I decided to reset my expectations for both the show and this characterization of Superman, since his character seemed good enough in his various appearances throughout the Arrowverse. I was immediately blown away from the first 5 episodes to the point where I binged the episode in a day and a half, which mostly is because I didn't want to reach the 5th episode that quickly. I loved every single thing about the episodes I've seen from Superman and Lois. I loved his take on Superman, his relationship with both his sons and Lois, the acting from the sons, and even the overall tone of this show. I didn't think that they could manage to make me care about day-to-day life as Clark Kent struggles to balance being Superman and being a father to his 2 sons. Weirdly enough, one of the most interesting things about the show is the dynamic of his 2 sons, and it's especially because of the fact that one son is an athletic football player, while the other son is a nerd who's learning how to use his powers for the first time. Their story is viable, and watching them bounce off of each other and building their brotherly chemistry is actually a joy to watch. Even in the scenes where Lois is standing up for what she believes in and stands up against her boss, which eventually leads to her quitting early on in the first 5 episodes, you enjoy watching it because it feels like the first time a non-superhero character in the Arrowverse finally stood up for something that they believe in. I also just want to point out that we've been so deprived of a good take on Superman that this moment from the first episode of Superman and Lois literally went viral.
Here you go, friend.
Thanks. Cool costume.
Thanks. My mom made it for me.
Do you see why everyone loved this exact moment in Superman and Lois? We literally have been deprived of simple yet lovable scenes like this in the Arrowverse. These first couple of episodes literally have higher highs than Arrow's early seasons, as much as I hate to admit it. I shockingly love this show and can't wait to see how this season ends. Just like Batwoman, I'll likely do a full overall season review sometime in the future and give my full in-depth thoughts regarding Superman and Lois' first season, but for now, it's currently, and rightfully so, sitting in second place. This show doesn't even fully deserve its first place ranking, and honestly, the only reason it has this place is because season 1 and 2 of The Flash might be the best live-action comic book content we've ever received from the CW. There's a reason why Reverse Flash keeps making a comeback time and time again in the later seasons of The Flash. He's literally the best villain in the Arrowverse. Without any hesitation, I'm pretty sure that we can say that Tom Cavanaugh is arguably the best actor in the Arrowverse. This man has put the Flash on his back from the first season to its 7th season. He has played multiple iterations of different Harrison Wells across the multiverse, which all had different personalities and different levels of chemistry with the main cast of the Flash. He was absolutely menacing when he was playing Reverse Flash, and even when he wasn't busy cracking jokes or being a villain, he had genuine chemistry with each member of the cast. The early seasons of The Flash will always be my favorite content from the CW, despite the mediocre writing, but there was still a level of entertainment, storytelling, and overall interest that was maintained throughout those seasons. They were doing such a good job at establishing the world of The Flash and Central City that we were able to fall in love with various aspects of the show. On top of that, this was way before there were several seasons of below mediocre writing, boring metahuman of the week, multiple weak main villains, and a terrible relationship between Barry and Iris. It wasn't Felicity levels, but it grew to become ridiculously uninteresting and just slowed the show down heavily because there's such a focus on their relationship in the middle seasons that other characters have their growth stunted. While we're speaking about other characters, I have to give a shout out to two specific characters in The Flash, Joe and Cisco. For the first time ever, I felt represented as a person who is Hispanic and into comics because of Cisco. Cisco, who eventually becomes Vibe, is the comedic relief, and he's constantly throwing out funny pop culture references that you'd get if you're old enough. Watching his character throughout the many seasons of The Flash felt like watching myself in the comic book universe because this iteration of Cisco matches not only my personality, but I do some of the things that he's done in the show. Seeing such a lighthearted dude truly be himself and living his best life with people such as Barry, Iris, Joe, and Caitlin is always a good time. You can also tell how important he is to the cast of characters when he lights up the room during multiple heavy moments throughout the show, when he uplifts characters by looking out for them, and more importantly, when he's simply there being a friend for everyone. That feels like me watching myself, and having that representation has meant the world to me. I'm pretty sure he's everyone's favorite father figure in the Arrowverse, but Jesse L. Martin deserves the recognition because of how he plays Joe West. This man has some of the most emotional scenes throughout the entire Arrowverse, whether it's being a father to Barry or Cisco, or simply giving Caitlin the advice or push she needs, and of course, being there for Iris when she needs that pep talk or relationship advice because she's concerned with Barry's well-being. Every single time one of those scenes happen, it feels genuine. Jesse Martin plays the role of this fantastic father that's always trying to be a good man who's there for everyone, and gets his payoff when his future wife eventually rolls into the show later on within the seasons. But seeing him be such a positive figure consistently throughout the show is kind of the payoff when you suffer through the rest of the things that go on during the later seasons. He's probably the most consistent character in the Arrowverse next to Cisco, and the best part about it is that even when he's thrown another person to care for, which is when Wally joins the show not too far into The Flash, you see the growing pains of that relationship. They don't click at all early on. In fact, Wally kind of can't stand Joe, but Joe keeps working at that relationship. He keeps trying to figure out how to understand Wally, and eventually they grow into a healthy father-son duo that feels legitimately earned. Then don't even get me started on Joe being a better Jim Gordon and actually finding ways to actually be both a likable cop and a good man while not coming off as potentially controversial. Joe West is one of the best characters in The Flash, and no one can change my mind on that. You know what? While I'm already praising people, can we give credit to Zoom in season 2? We go from having the Reverse Flash, who is literally relentless towards Barry and trains him so they can eventually fight each other, to Zoom, who is literally a menace to Central City. This man did whatever the hell he wanted in season 2 and literally made Barry look like an absolute idiot in front of the Central PD in that one specific scene.
This man is no god. He is nothing.
That was the first time that I felt absolutely stunned since Slade Wilson walked right into Oliver's house and gave him a firm handshake in front of his family. Zoom literally schooled Barry after he thought everything was going to be fine and he was going to be able to emotionally process what happened between him and Reverse Flash. Zoom is still a top 2 villain and would run literal circles around the other main villains that follow after him in seasons 3 and onward. Now, with all of this praising being done, there's still a massive drop in quality in The Flash. There's a massive fallout that starts in season 3 where Savitar is the main villain, and they make arguably the worst creative decision I've ever seen when Savitar says his more than well-known line, "I am the future Flash."
Who are you?
I am the future Flash.
Other villains that also eventually make their way to The Flash, such as the Thinker and Cicada, both show up, which results into overly boring seasons with terrible writing and CGI that has only gotten worse over time in The Flash. It's just beyond frustrating because The Flash starts off absolutely fantastic for what it is, and compared to Arrow, it's probably a much stronger show overall depending on someone's interest in the Green Arrow or The Flash. It's just that there's such a terrible fall off and there's so many weird things that end up happening, such as Wally becoming less of a main character because the actor wanted to walk away from The Flash, Iris and Barry's relationship falling off in terms of quality, Barry managing to always be dumber than every single villain that comes across his way, despite being ridiculously smart, and more. The Flash could have been the CW's best show overall if it stood consistent in terms of quality from season 3 to season 7, but unfortunately, that's not the case. I will say though, the last season of The Flash was the best one yet since season 3, which isn't necessarily saying much, but it's gotten better somewhat. I don't know how much longer we're gonna have The Flash, but I'm here for it until the ride is over. At this point, the Arrowverse should simply be called the Flashverse, since the Flash pretty much is the main component of this universe. With very high highs and super low lows, The Flash is my favorite Arrowverse show. And honestly, that just about does it for the video. If you've made it this far, just know that I appreciate the hell out of you. Writing the script was way easier than I thought it'd be, and looking back at the shows and trying to rank them was fun until figuring out where I wanted to place the top 3 shows. By the way, I'm more than aware that Supergirl has joined the CW after its first season, but the only reason I chose to not include it in this video is because we haven't seen how the CW has handled its second season. I'd like to wait for the second season to begin, see how it is and feel it out so I can compare it to the first season. Then I could do a long review video in the future instead, which just logically makes more sense. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you really enjoyed this video, hit that sub button. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, write a comment down below. Don't forget to keep it real with peace, love, and positivity.